Hello and welcome back. Today we are in the gardens of the Blue Palace, as you can see, and I thought we might take a little tour of the Crowned Prince's apartments in the palace, because I don't know if I've shown you them before. We've seen the King and Queen's apartments quite a lot of the time. I've shown them numerous times. But I thought we might take a look at the Crown Prince's rooms today, which are on the right side of the palace, over there on the ground floor. It's quite murky weather in this world currently, and I am doing work on the gardens here, but they're much like the gardens of Versailles, so they are huge Baroque gardens, and I'm doing all of this work by myself. I built the whole palace by myself, which has taken me all work through. I worked on it through all of lockdown, so that was years ago, and so that's when I had plenty of time to build and get creative. And this is the garden facade of the palace. You can only see a small fraction of it here. It goes a lot further back. It's just a huge building. Anyway, let's go inside. So this is the back facade of the building, and we're entering into the marble hall, which is like a saloon, a sort of a waiting room. It's just a sort of a public space where people can come and go, like a public thoroughfare in the building, where people would come and go and pass through into the court royal, which is just through there. Anyway, so the prince's rooms are through here, what I call the Dauphin, which is the French name for the Crown Prince, under the Ancien Régime. So, yeah, the Crown Prince's grand apartment. So these are his public rooms, and we're starting off here with the guard room, which I think is probably one of the biggest rooms at the start of the apartments. A lot of these rooms are inspired by Versailles, but they are all of my own design. So they've taken inspiration off of things, but they are all of my own design, as is the rest of the building. So yeah, it's quite an empty space, bit of a simplistic design, but the further you go into the apartments, the grander and more sumptuous they become. So we're going to enter into what's called the enfilade, which is an alignment of doors which runs the full length of the apartments, and they turn left at the very end and follow on to the Crown Princess's rooms, but we'll see them in a little while. So we're going to start off with the sort of first or sort of official room into the Crown Prince's apartment, which is the first antechamber, which is a very public space, very simplistic room, not that much to it, but it does have a very elegant and pretty design. Following on, we have the second antechamber, and as you can see, all of a sudden the decoration starts to get a bit more intricate, as you could say. Got a much more of a beautiful ceiling. As you can see, I like to use lots of gold. My theme, I always like to make things very over-decorated. That's just sort of my style. The more over the top, the better. Then we enter into the third antechamber, which is a bit more extravagant, a bit bigger. And these are rooms, the antechambers would be used for as sorts of like waiting rooms or little drawing rooms. Basically, they're very public spaces, but generally the rooms would get more exclusive the further you go into the apartments. So yeah, we're going to follow on from the third antechamber and follow on in. Crown Prince's bedchamber, which is very, very grand. I sort of went a bit over the top with this decoration, but like I say, I love extravagance in builds. You know, that the bigger the better, the grander the better. So we got what's called a balustrade in front of the bed, which acts as a sort of partition from the public thoroughfare of the room, which is this side. But if you cross the threshold behind the balustrade, you have entered into a more exclusive part of the room where the Crown Prince actually sleeps, and his bed is built on a sort of a raised platform to emphasise this bed's importance. Behind these rooms, you have the through that doorway, you have the Crown Prince's private apartments, and we'll have a look at one of the rooms here. This is a staircase that leads upstairs into the Queen's apartments, which is just directly above. But if we go over here, there's a small library behind the Crown Prince's rooms. Not very grand, but these are more sort of private spaces, so they don't need to be as opulent as the public rooms such as this, but they do have very beautiful design. Following on, we have the audience chamber. Now this room is a room where the Crown Prince would be seated upon a throne and people would be admitted in to see him. I speak about the rooms as if they were being actually used because it gives you a better sense of what their purposes are. But the room has a very beautiful sort of like a green and gold design. And yeah, I've incorporated some gold into the floor, which I think adds a bit more sort of grandeur to the space. I haven't visited these apartments in quite a while, but I did complete them a long time ago. So bear with me if I'm not that accurate with what I'm talking about. I haven't visited these rooms in quite a while. Then we enter into the next space, which is called the Privy Drawing Room, the private drawing room. So this room is very exclusive. It's a private drawing room. It's a room that's used that would only the most important people who live at the palace would be admitted into this room to have sort of one-on-one company with the Crown Prince. Then we follow on to what is probably the most interesting and probably one of the most colourful and opulent rooms. This is a room that's designed with the chinoiserie style, which is a sort of oriental interior design. And it's called the Large Chamber. This acts as the sort of halfway point between the Crown Prince's apartments and the Crown Princess's rooms. This room typically would be opened up for public gatherings, and it could be a very public space, but it's at the very interior of the apartments, so it's not necessarily as public as the first rooms. It would be opened up, and people would be allowed in to be used as like a ballroom or something like that. We're going to carry on with the tour, and we're going to enter into the Crown Prince's most private room, which is his study, if you can see here. Now this one is inspired by the Dauphin's study at the Palace of Versailles. It has the same colour scheme, the same layout. And if we go behind here through this open bookcase door, you can see that I've started work on some of the Crown Prince's private chambers. All of these interiors are primarily inspired by 18th century design. That's the palace's main theme, is the 18th century. And now we start to enter into the Crown Princess's rooms, but we're entering the rooms from the end of the apartments rather than the start, because the Crown Prince's rooms on the left and the Crown Princess's rooms on the right meet in the most private rooms. So following on the tour, we are entering the Crown Princess's rooms from the most private rooms, starting off with her the signs over here. I think this is her study, I'm pretty sure. It's an audience chamber. And a friend of mine actually helped me build these rooms. That's why the decoration is a bit more different. Because they used to join me on this world, and they helped me build a couple of the rooms in the palace. But I had to finish them off myself. But they did build this design. And also with this room in here, I think they said this one was inspired by Kensington Palace, but I'm not really 100% sure, but they're beautiful nonetheless. I like their style. And this is a privy chamber, a private room. very different spaces. And then this room here is inspired by the Red Velvet Drawing Room, which was a room in Carlton House, which was the residence of George IV, Prince Regent, before he knocked it down and moved into what is now Buckingham Palace. But Carlton House had some of the most dazzling and sumptuous interiors before it was all knocked down. And as we all know, if you know your history, George IV was very extravagant. So I wanted to try and incorporate that extravagant style into these apartments. And yes, there you go, the Red Velvet Drawing Room. Like I say, I haven't visited these rooms in a long time, so I can't remember always what they're all called. Then we come into the Crown Princess's bedchamber here, and it lags a little bit because I've used all these frames on the walls to make a sort of a very intricate sort of wall design. And it's funny because the Crown Prince's bedchamber looks a lot more colourful and bright, and the Crown Princess's bedchamber looks a lot more dark and sort of gaudy in a way. But it follows the same style of the Crown Prince's rooms with the balustrade in front of the bed. You've got this huge canopy over the bed, and this is what's known as a Duchess style bed, with this sort of two posters and the overhang, much like Marie Antoinette's bed at the Palace of Versailles. And again, you can see I built these little doors, but behind here eventually will be the private apartments of the Crown Princess, where they could live exclusively, but the public rooms are used for public functions. I built all these little hidden staircases in the palace leading up to the Queen's apartments above. We have another very colourful room. I'm not sure what it's called. An antechamber. So they follow the same layout as each other's, the Crown Prince and the Crown Princess's rooms. They follow the same layout, but they just look different, obviously, with their styles. I've incorporated a lot of bamboo. I think as the updates came along, as the game sort of, as the build progressed, I started using bamboo and all these different materials. And I quite like this room. I like the stripes on the walls and the ceiling. I used to get quite creative. I have a full-time job, so it's hard to find the time to do these builds. But when I do, I love getting creative and just creating the most sumptuous rooms possible. I love building staircases like this as well, with the skylight at the top. And they lead up to the Queen's banqueting room, which is just upstairs. But we'll look at those another time. I think we've already seen them on my page. I think you've seen them 2 or 3 times. This room is inspired by Russian, the sort of Imperial Russian interior style. And I think it's at the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg that they have it. I'm pretty sure it is. But there's a drawing room in there with this sort of style. This is the large chamber of the Crown Princess's rooms. And it's got a bit more of a different style. It looks a bit more 19th century. So the idea is that parts of the palace would have been updated as sort of, times have gone on. But a lot of the palace still retains its original 18th century decoration. But the idea is that rooms like these, have been changed as successive generations have lived at the palace. That's the idea. We have working fireplaces, as you can see, and then we enter into the guard room, which is here, again with the same columned design, but I wanted it to be really big and impressive because it sort of follows on from the grand staircase here, which is the Queen's staircase in the palace, and it's the palace from the Palace of Caserta. It's the staircase from the Palace of Caserta in Italy, I think this is one of the first rooms I ever built in this build. The first sort of interiors that I built in this build. And it's just so opulent and grand. And my favourite part has to be the central dome, because it really just gives the room this sort of extra bit of grandeur, and all the colours and stuff above. And I've added in lights and everything around the dome to give it a bit more of some flair and dramatic lighting. And then we enter out into the Queen's Courtyard, which is a sort of a more of exclusive courtyard to the main Court Royal, which is on the other side of that wing. Equestrian statue in the centre here of a queen on horseback, I'm pretty sure. And then this facade here is inspired by a villa in Venice. So there's lots of different architectural elements in this build. It's very sort of like neoclassical, and also very baroque, very fantasy. It just has a lot of my own design. And then if we have a quick look over here, we can see the Queen's carriage, which is like her state carriage, which she would travel around in with its double doors, and very pretty, beautiful design. And the scale of it's enormous, but I like building things bigger because you can add more detail. So yeah, you can see also the interior decorations in the carriage. If I just go around the corner here, you can see one of the end pavilions there. And then if I go inside the carriage, you can see some of its lavish interior decorations. And also this beautiful fence with its gates and everything. And then obviously over here you have the main central courtyard, which is the Court Royal, which is the most open and public courtyard. There'll be a massive courtyard here eventually, called the Court of Honour. And you can see one of the ministers' wings there, which I've started to build. And then eventually that way you will find the stables and everything. But obviously this project has taken me years. It's not something you can build quickly. It takes a long, long time. And then we have the main gates here to the palace, which are inspired by Versailles. So there's a lot to see here. Over there you can see the minister's wing with its dome, which is inspired by Greenwich in London, the Naval College. That's called the Ambassador's Entrance over there. So you know when visiting dignitaries come to the palace, they have an exclusive entrance into the building, a very sort of ceremonial entrance into the palace. And you can see the King's Courtyard over here, and it's the same layout. So inside there you've got the King's grand staircase, which leads to his state apartments. I don't know what goes on with this lighting. There's all sorts of weird lighting on the wall there, on the pavilion. Okay, we'll have a quick look at the ambassador's entrance, and then I've got to go. But I'll just show you. I've also begun building some houses over here inspired by Belgravia. In London, these houses are inspired by Belgravia. Because they've always fascinated me, those houses, for some reason. I love Upstairs Downstairs, if you've ever seen that. It's a very old period drama, a bit like Downton Abbey, but it was made in the 80s. But it's literally my most favourite TV series, my favourite old TV series, and I love it, and I've seen every episode about 10 times. On the right you've got the Royal Chapel, which is like Versailles, same layout, same style, but the interior of it is from the Palace of Caserta, and I've shown you that one before if you've seen it. The interiors. We'll look at that another time, but we'll just go inside this wing here quickly, and I'll show you the ambassador's entrance into the palace, because it's quite something, and I think you'll enjoy it. So little door here, but when you walk inside, you've got this magnificent interior space, which is meant to be as grand and impressive as possible, because when you have visiting dignitaries from other countries coming to your palace, you need to impress them so they can go home and tell their kings and queens of how impressive your palace is. That's the idea. So you've got the dome up there, and then we got this very large grand staircase which wraps around the room. You can see the floor design there, and we follow up this very grand staircase up this room, and you can get a better view of the ceiling there, and all of this gold, which I love doing. And I also like doing the wrapping the gold around the columns. That's a very characteristic thing of mine. I just really think it adds a bit of opulence into any space. And then we head on into the grand sort of ceremonial hall here, which is the painted hall at Greenwich Naval College, and it's been used in many films. But I built it here in my own style, and just made it very, very grand. There's a big design on the wall over there, the columns, and this beautiful design here. This room isn't quite finished just yet, but it will be at some point. And then you go on into the start of the King's Grand Apartments just here. You've got his beautiful room there, looks a bit like the Hall of Mirrors. And through there you have the Apotheosis Chamber, which is the biggest room in the King's Grand Apartments. And then following on from there you have the Royal Chapel. But we'll look at that another time. But we'll have a quick look at the King's Grand Staircase, and then I've got to go. I mean it this time. We'll just have a quick look at the King's Grand Staircase. If you've ever seen or heard of the Opera Garnier in Paris, this room is inspired by that. But it's just a lot more opulent, and I don't know, not more opulent, but it's more in my own style. And it's also inspired by the Ambassador's Staircase, which once existed at the Palace of Versailles, but naughty Louis XV knocked it down to build his own private suite of rooms and rooms for his daughters to live in, such as Madame Adelaide. Anyway, that's the end of the little tour there. I hope you enjoyed that, and until next time.